the topic today is on artificial intelligence, AI, in the insurance industry. AI can be a buzzword, so I think it's pretty important for us to start off first by talking about what we mean when we use that phrase AI, so it doesn't get thrown around without any meaning or context. And I'm going to pick on Asa first to define that. He's the technology person on the panel. So, so when we talk about AI, specifically in the insurance sector, what are we really talking about?
So maybe we'll start with what it's not. So 6 years ago, when I started talking about AI, it was, is it the Terminator or is it chatbots? That was really the only two options you had when talking about AI. Now you can throw in autonomous vehicles and other things. So yes, they are applications and uses of AI, but if you think about AI as a hierarchy on the pathway to artificial general intelligence, when the robots do take over the world, which hopefully is a long way into the future, we then have kind of artificial intelligence where the computers are able to do certain things, narrow domain, things faster than humans can. And that's faster because either the data is too big, it's moving too fast, or it's too complicated. And then you come down another level, and then there's kind of elements of AI where you've got machine learning, you've got natural language processing, you've got computer vision, and then below that again, you've got things like data science, and then down into statistics and down into math and physics, that kind of stuff. So when we talk about AI, we're looking at the application of artificial intelligence in insurance, not what in the realm of possibility, how do we apply autonomous vehicles to insurance? We're kind of thinking, let's keep it narrow on how do some of the specific capabilities of AI and benefit insurance, InsurTech, and customers.
By the way, this is an open panel with questions, so anyone on Zoom and anyone in the panel in the floor today, if you do have a question, just raise your hand and we'll ask for them to go.
Push that out remote.
So adding on to that, your technology company does work in the insurance sector now. What are some use cases that you're aware of within insurance that seem compelling uses of AI?
Yeah, so I think all of you probably have had the AI is going to change the world, transform everything kind of pitch a few years ago when we had the peak of expectation, and now we're in this trough of disillusionment where everyone's like, what the hell? Why didn't it deliver the transformation that everybody promised? And so now we're into the kind of practical application, nuts and bolts of how do we apply AI, machine learning, data science into insurance. So we're focused in the unstructured data part to it. So documents, support tickets, customer exchanges, that kind of stuff. And so if you, in insurance especially, maybe even more heavily weighted, but in most businesses, you've got 20% structured data, 80% unstructured data. A lot of time and effort has been put into that structured data, the databases, moving from data warehouses to Excel into Power BI kind of journey. But in the document space, that's a lot harder. You can't just run a query and get some intelligence out the side. You're dealing with a much more complex, much more challenging process of understanding language, and then understanding insurance language, and then understanding how to get value from that. And so that value chain is what we're focused on.
And so there's a lot of natural language processing that goes into that in terms of understanding the document, understanding how that means insurance.
Yeah, so that if you think, so we're focused on 3 areas. So you've got search, so how do you find the stuff that you want to find, which when you've got potentially decades worth of policies and associated documents, and it's probably across a number of different systems or geographies. So how do you find the stuff to start with? Then how do you get information out of it? So the extraction part, how do you find names, dates, clauses, policies, that kind of stuff? And then how do you generate reports off the back of that for compliance, the increasing regulation, internal use cases? So again, there's a lot of value in those documents, but also there's a lot of needs to comply with the powers that be that needs information from those documents.
Over to you now. So this is great because we have an operator within an insurance organization, an operator of an InsurTech, and then an operator of a technology company. So we get a few good lenses today in terms of perspectives of what AI is and what it can do within the industry. So when it comes to pursuing something that's quite technologically progressive, such as an AI project within a large insurance organization, in your experiences, what are some of the foundational issues that need to be resolved before we get started?
Yeah, sure. Just by way of clarity, my background is life insurance, so I was leading a very large project for the development of an income protection process through the use of AI. Because traditionally for a life insurer, one of the biggest issues they have with the calculation of an income protection claim is, first of all, exactly to your point, the customer comes up front. You might be spending 4 days trying to find out what policy that customer actually has. And then you have somebody who's not a medical expert and who's not a financial expert having to assess whether or not this claim can be paid and so on and so forth. So the customer experience is absolutely appalling and can take up to 6 months for these claims to be assessed, particularly if you're a self-employed individual. So the value that AI brings to that process is exponential. So as we explored within the business, to answer your question, where you might decide to approach your problems, you do have to figure out, first of all, what are the problems you want to solve? Because everything, is potentially solved by digitalization. But what are the problems that are the most valuable to solve? And I think one of the things that we learn as a business is we're so used to building business cases based on the benefits that are immediately quantifiable. Right. But with AI, it's quite different because there's a lot of benefits that are non-quantifiable. So you really have to have the right people in the room to actually be able to assess what the potential benefit may be from this investment. That's one of the biggest hurdles to actually get over, and to convince your board that an unmeasurable benefit is still one that definitely is worth investing in. Right. So like a foundational issue. And also, of course, with AI, it will improve as it goes on. So once you've got it in, then the benefits will start exponentially growing. So I think that's a big challenge, is trying to make the business case, because the investment is usually very, very large if you're in a large insurance company for large programs like that. Right. And then I think the second piece for me is really making sure your sponsor is the right sponsor, and your sponsor has a translator that they get on with, because tech speak is a different language to business people. Yeah. And so often we talk at cross purposes with each other. And there's a real need to make sure that those two talk very clearly together, and that the business benefits and the technology benefits actually line up. You'd be surprised how many times the tech guys say, yay, we did a fantastic job. And the business is going, well, nothing's changed as far as we're concerned. So there's a real need to really drive that communication.
Interesting. And for you, Dale, on the customer facing side of that, right, when you're trying to convey those intangible benefits that the customer might need, how do you best describe how AI can be used for my client?
Yeah, it's a tough question. I think insurance generally is at the very beginning of the AI journey. There's a massive amount of opportunity as a tech vendor. To be honest, it was in the early days. Is it a bot, or is it a robot? But actually, the technology is very accessible, and that's been a surprise to us as a business. And if you build your business case right, and you engage right, and you can articulate the value, the technology is actually really accessible. And I think for us, and me in particular, the accessibility of the technology has been a big surprise to us. And actually making that point when we're selling into opportunities, hey, are there particular problems that potentially AI can solve that perhaps an insurance business actually hasn't contemplated yet? And I think in the particular use case that we're developing with ACE here, there's a genuinely, for us, it's a market-breaking opportunity. So I think embracing that's the point I want to get across tonight, is if you've got a business problem, the technology is really accessible. So open your minds and actually embrace AI and see what it can do for you, either tangibly or intangibly.
Yeah, I think just to comment on both of those things. I think one of the things that we see is there isn't always a connection between a strategic imperative of the business and a technology project. And so we see time and time again, sometimes it's an innovation box that wants to be ticked. Right. We do a prototype, we get some either mainly intangible benefit, we've learned some stuff, we know the art of the possible, but never makes it into real business value, and it dies on the vine. Or it doesn't get that escape velocity to get it to build momentum behind it. So having that right sponsor, absolutely right. And I think the art of the possible is still where a lot of people are at,
Yeah.
because they still think AI is this futuristic, multi-million-dollar, only the biggest companies in the world can do it. And during the last couple of years, when people have been going, what's going on, why aren't we getting any value, the technology's kept on marching on, and its capability and its accessibility now is at the point where you can start really small and get very quick value and just get on the journey, because it is a journey. Thing AI needs to learn, but also the organizations need to mature, and that's probably more of the challenge. I kind of say, aside from a few laws of physics and biology, technology can solve most problems. It's the humans that get in the way. And so it's really getting the organizational readiness to kind of get going and embrace the technology and its potential.
And I think to that point as well, I think I would say, if you look around executive tables that are making decisions around this, there's not enough tech people sitting at the table. So you really need the smart CEOs are taking technology people on to these different functions so that you can actually start to make that progress.
Right. So back to you again, InsurTechs operate at a very different cadence than business organizations. Insurance organizations run at a different cadence than regular business organizations. So operationally, how do you make something that would be, intangible technology deployed with all the right stakeholders in an organization such as an insurance organization? How do you make that actually happen?
Oh, I wish I knew. So what we did was we moved to a full enterprise agile in the organization I was in an attempt to try and move us from the dinosaur that we were and still are. I think there has to be a real commitment to change, and again, that sponsorship and that business ownership. So your sponsor being at your showcase, understanding the details, your sponsor asking the questions of the vendors and the third parties. And so they really need to understand what's going on. But the sponsor has to have enough seniority in the organization to actually get things happening. Do I think we moved fast enough? Absolutely no way. It's still way too slow. But I think it will pick up pace for two reasons. I think smart organizations are making data literacy and AI literacy a key part of their training program for their staff. Right. And so they'll attract more people who are more fast-paced, we'll say, than your traditional insurance operator to the businesses. And the businesses see that basically the market is going to demand for people to move faster and take more risks in what they're delivering.
And the touch point that you're applying it, is it internal, is it external? So you talked about life insurance, right? It sounds like there's a touch point there with the end customer.
Yeah.
Are you seeing use cases being more internal or more customer facing?
Both. So the instance that I was talking to you around income protection, the ultimate vision was using natural language processing to read doctors' reports. So the customer will just go online and they will upload their doctor's report. Even better, you'd have an API to the doctor's surgery where the report would come straight through to you. So all the way through the chain. But I have to say, from a business perspective, definitely the customer piece is the piece you leave almost last, because you really want to make sure that what you're building internally is not going to disrupt your customer experience. That's not to say, though, that your customer experience does not have to be considered at all stages of the journey, regardless of whether it's an internal process that you're building. So CX people being in those squads are really, really important, so that you're beginning to see what's this going to look like at the end.
I'm taking notes on the requirements. So given that perspective, from a technology person's perspective, how are you building the business cases for implementing AI to your clients and customers?
Yeah, I mean, that building of the business case is definitely a challenge. We kind of go through a discovery process, trying to get everybody in the room, like you were saying, the right stakeholders, the right North Star, the right understanding of the domain, the data. Trying to get that nailed down as early as possible is really key. To the point where we're starting to put those assessment questionnaires into our onboarding kind of product process to try and get the education up front on this is how to think about AI. Because unless you're connecting it to that business imperative, it becomes really, really difficult to get any kind of traction or support, gather the right resources and so on. So I think that's the vital part. How do you begin to think about these emerging technology projects and make them connected to a strategic goal rather than just an IT project that sits off on the side? Because that then gets into you come up really hard against either waterfall approaches or legacy technology problems, or just the way IT projects are run. And if there isn't that real business engagement, then it just doesn't happen. And we just kind of see that time.
And is there kind of a drip feed process for either of the implementers here? I call it the MVI, right? The minimum viable intelligence.
Yeah, so that's always a journey, and it's a journey both in terms of the organization. If you look at whether you use Gartner's data maturity process or other frameworks, going from the ideation to the prototype, to the lab scale, to the factory scale, to the transformation scale, there's a long journey there. For insurance, it will be longer than it will be for InsurTech, that's for sure. But it is a journey both in terms of the organization and also the technology. You start with the MVI, or what is the minimum value that you can get with the minimum amount of confidence or precision, and you build up the confidence in it. You start using it to predict what humans would do before you start automating what the humans might do, and go through that learning journey. And it's understanding that, which is a big challenge. There isn't that many people that have implemented AI in organizations. So when you go internally to go, how do we do this thing? And people go, well, I'll Google it, or I'll, there isn't that organizational knowledge that exists. And in a country like New Zealand, it's even kind of more challenging, because even the big four consultants don't have that expertise either. So you're kind of like, where do you get that guidance from is one of the challenges.
Yeah, and for you, Dale, a lot of people are wanting it just to get their AI checkbox in. How do you translate that into something that's actually of value to your customers?
Yeah, so for us, it was a market thing. The business cases, we either wanted to go into a particular territory or we didn't. So there was a genuine problem to solve.
Yeah.
And
a genuine problem solved for your business, or for your customers?
For us moving into a particular market.
Okay. Yeah.
So there wasn't any business case. It was, well, do we want to go there? It's a great opportunity, good market, or don't we? And obviously, strategically, we think it's a great fit for us, this particular market. So we embarked on a journey to use AI to unlock that market opportunity. And when we do, the business case will be fantastic. So
you haven't proven the business case yet?
So look, I think insurance is still very much at the very beginning of the journey. But
yeah, sure. Cool. And going back to the kind of human relationships, where will those relationships matter the most in terms of human relationships and AI adoption? I know you have an excellent answer because you talked about last night. Do you want to start on yours?
Well, I think human relationships are always going to be important. And when you think about it, my experience of life insurance anyway has been that human interaction is critically important, and it's what differentiates you from, let's say, a bank, if you're a life insurance company, because you've got that close relationship with the customer, most likely at their most vulnerable time in their lives. So that is critically important. And so the vision for us was that we would have a staff that were 90% focused on managing the relationship with the customer at that time. And so the journey is to encapsulate ensuring that all of the administrative low-value relationship management tasks can all be solved through machine learning and through AI development, and giving a superior upfront relationship management service to your customer, but also being really mindful of, and I used to say, when my kids get to that point in time, they may not want that human relationship. So we have to monitor what makes that special for the customer and be prepared to build in the future a digital interaction with people that may actually pick up on those key points. So by way of example, when a few years ago, I helped to develop an online life insurance product. And one of the biggest issues that life insurers have is they cannot sell online. Customers will not buy life insurance online anywhere in the world. And the reason for that is because it's a complex product and it's a personal product, and machines just can't create that connection, but they will eventually, but they can't create that connection right now. And what we did was, after we developed the product, the most interesting part of it all was it was a raving success once we gave customers a telephone number to ring. And that the customer, they would do it online if there was somebody on the phone helping them to complete it online, even though that conversation was 2.5 minutes. So I think it's around being really intelligent in terms of figuring out what's that point of connection.
Yeah.
And ultimately, a machine will likely be able to do a lot of it. And it will be replicating the relationship. I don't think replacing it in every instance, but replicating it in a lot of instances.
I think for me, AI for the next decade or longer is going to be about giving humans superpowers. And whether that's automating the manual parts of the relationship management process, or whether that's the personalization at scale to get those engagements. I think that's the bit that we should be. I don't think we should go straight to how do we replace the humans, because one, that's scary. But we, especially in New Zealand, we're in a country where human resources are scarce. So we can't have business models and growth which requires more humans, but we don't also want to give up on the personal relationships, human relationships. So we've got to figure out how to augment the humans to be able to deliver better, rather than just deliver more at a lower cost.
And again, because
So
you have the experience, was there ever a perceived threat of these projects to people within your organization?
Absolutely, there is. That's a very, very real issue. And so staff are afraid that machines are replacing them in their jobs. So what we, and going back to the business case, a lot of the business cases will assume that you're taking efficiencies out through headcount. So I think it's really around facing up to that and accepting that you can retrain people into roles that are more suited to the future around the use of AI. And you can give people comfort that there's a time period that's going to elapse between now and when AI will actually replace their roles. But there is an honesty factor around the fact that you think you're going to have a team of 10, and today you have a team of 100. So I think it's around being honest with people. People are scared of it. Retraining, I think employers have an obligation to retrain people so that they can be moved into other roles that may exist in the organization.
Is that part of your change management process intentionally when it comes to upskilling?
Absolutely. Yes, it was. We had a whole AI training program that all the staff attended. I have to say, you get varying success because people may or may not be interested or have the ability to go with it. So we saw a few green shoots of people wanting to move from, we'll say, a very traditional, say, underwriting type of role into an AI development role, but just green shoots, nothing that showed us that there was going to be a wholesale move, we'll say, for certain parts of the business, because it's still very specialized and you still seek to bring in most of that resource from externally. But I think, again, with time, if you run your business properly and you're fair to people, you're really honest with them, and there's opportunities for people if they want to go on the journey.
Dale, so when we're talking about the stack of AI, you have AI, you have machine learning, and you have data science, but none of that is really of any use unless you have some fidelity in the actual data. Right? So legacy is something we encounter a lot in insurance. Kind of the different kinds of data sources that you have. So when you're taking people on a journey and we're talking about fidelity of data or looking at the data to see if there's a good use case in there, how do you leverage the sorry, what was my question? How can you use AI to apply to these data sets to show them the value that this legacy data can still have?
Yeah, so I mean, there's no doubt about the fact that legacy technology and insurance is a massive roadblock, but especially for technology vendors like us, but also the insurance companies that run it every day. There isn't any doubt about that. I think our use of AI has been all about a market opportunity, so I'm probably not entirely qualified to talk about how we unlock it, but I think one of the key points is actually starting small. Just start with a really slither of what you think might be possible, and actually obtain the outcomes that are going to make a difference, and then present that back to your client and say, hey, some of your data, this is what we've been able to do, and it'll turn lights on.
Yeah,
and I think that's a key way to even sell internally is prove that in a very small way, you'd be able to solve a big problem.
Did you have any experience with fudging around with legacy data sets to prove value?
Sometimes it's actually getting the data out of the legacy system, which is the first point. Like,
Yeah.
well, we can't export more than a megabyte a day. Like, this could be a problem. Or if we do that, it's going to make our transaction system fall over. So you have some of those real technology problems just getting access to the data. But for those that have kind of gone on at least started on that journey, the question then becomes, what can we do with all of this data?
Yeah.
So there's no shortage of it once you can kind of disconnect it and see it and kind of free it for analysis. Machine learning can play a role in that. There's techniques of unsupervised machine learning where you basically, so what's in this data? What is interesting to the humans to go, oh, these patterns look kind of interesting, or these correlations, or these anomalies, or these whatever. And so there are ways to help start the journey by actually using AI to start looking at your data before you even know what AI can do with the data.
Yeah.
So you can kind of go through that discovery process. But the first point is you've got to get access to data, or because most of the legacy systems are transaction-based systems of record, they weren't actually designed to be useful necessarily in terms of the future of insurance. So therefore, it's what new data sources can you start collecting? And for some organizations, actually, it's like, just forget about the legacy, unless you can actually get a customer ID and tie something back. So what new data can you start collecting? What can you get from your web apps? What can you get from, whether it be social media? What can you get from various other places like connected devices and so on? And think about new propositions using new data rather than just trying to find new propositions from old data.
Do you, when you're working on these projects, there's some in-house capabilities, but I'm guessing there's a lot of kind of third-party service providers and InsurTech brought in to help you along the way. What's been your experience with making all of those parties work?
Again, I think it's been varied. I think part of the challenge is that there's different languages being spoken, and so it takes a long time for trust to build up between the business sponsor, I think, and the external provider. We had, when we were running ours, we had the external provider form part of the squad.
Yeah.
So they were actually in the squad, attended at the stand-ups, we were at the showcases, we could see them, and that had some value. We were challenged because a lot of our providers were overseas, so we people having to work really stupid hours and stuff to make this stuff work. But I think that has some value. I think though there's a continual. He said it's their fault the whole time.
Yeah.
The whole time, the business will blame the provider, and the provider will blame the business. Again, I just cannot overemphasize how that communication and somebody being able to really understand, get in the weeds, understand what the issues are to actually try and move it along. Because there were many times where vendors lost their contracts with us because somebody in the business had given some sort of a gripe about what had happened, and nobody really fully understood it. So it was easy to just give it to the vendor and see if somebody else can come in and solve the problem.
And,
That's real. That's real.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Are there questions from the room? Any questions in the room? Just thinking about it. I know you're loving being moderator. I was just wondering if anyone in the room, if we run out of time or online. I can see one chat there, but I wonder if there's any questions. None at all?
From experience, well, I guess I'll jump in. From experience, Mark Hale, CTO, AIA life insurer. Is there from experience a place to start in terms of solving business problems? I mean, underwriting claims, customer, is there a place that has, you talked a little bit about not starting with a customer, maybe starting in the back end, but from any experience, where do you start? Like where would you try and learn and iterate from?
Yeah, I think for us, claims was an obvious place to start because there's so much hidden value in claims and there's so much resource that's pumped into a claims team for a life insurance business. So claims was an obvious area. There wasn't really much debate because of the potential opportunity that sat within it. And then the other place we were looking very closely at was pricing. And so how might you use AI, external data sources, internal data sources to create a sharper pricing mechanism for your products. So those two were the big ticket items, really, neither of which have been newly successful implemented because it's still a journey and it will be for a few years. But I think just off the cuff, those two areas were kind of simply obvious that you'd look at.
Okay, thank you.
For us, we're seeing compliance as the incentive stroke stick, and knowing the increasing compliance requirements, reporting, and how that's going to add a greater administrative reporting burden when you're already at maximum capacity. That's going to be a challenge. And so there's relatively straightforward wins in there, which can be pretty quick and meaningful. And again, in the climate, whether it be cost out, whether it just be cost to serve, or those kind of major levers, it's just beginning that journey. Because what we find is it doesn't really matter your entry point, because a lot of these technologies are pretty foundational. So if you can get any excuse to get something in, then the use cases would accumulate, and it isn't the same size leaps every time. The first one may be relatively large, and it can be more around the change processes, but after that, adding the use cases on. So in some respects, in our view, because of the way it's relatively simple to get going now, it's just find any excuse and then start building it within, because the bigger the business case, the harder it falls. And so there is a little bit of, yes, finding something which is meaningful to move the needle to get stakeholders involved, but it's not too big that if it fails, it doesn't go quite as well, then it's going to then really stops momentum. For us, it's always, how do you build momentum? Because AI, again, in our view, and with bias, is an inevitability in terms of it will just be software. At some point, it will be the technology which is used. So it's any way to get on that journey is better than just ignoring it and kind of pushing it into the future.
We've seen exactly that too, where we started with a particular use case, taking highly unstructured data, legacy system, and putting some AI and ML over the top of it. And already our business is, hang on, can we actually use, we could actually use this technology for other things. So you start to open the mind of your people, and it's a fantastic opportunity. And I totally agree with Aisha's comment that AI needs to be part of everyone's strategic agenda when it comes to technology, no doubt about it.
So tapping on that, then on the smaller side of town, outside of the large insurance organizations, what are you seeing in terms of use cases for AI for brokers and agencies and underwriters?
Yeah, so I think, there isn't any doubt about the fact that in our region, particularly insurance intermediaries, the market that we target has been very underserviced from a technology perspective. That's something that we're trying to improve on, but the amount of unstructured data that organizations have because of this legacy technology is a massive opportunity for us to, I think, as I said at the beginning, we're at the very, almost at the data end of the journey, getting the structured data right. And once that's enabled, then AI, ML, starting to solve those sorts of problems.
Are you seeing engagement on the customer engagement side, like on the chat side as well? Have you got people looking at adopting that on the smaller side of town?
Yeah, so for us, we subscribe to a support platform to help our very happy customers, and that uses AI.
Okay.
So there's a lot of chat functionality built in, obviously quite a bit of training. But, it's just a small example of how we use part of another application. I think that just goes to show it's part of the future. It's whether you actually know it or not, you're probably interacting at some point in time with some form of AI, that's for sure.
We're kind of seeing at the smaller end of town, like 20-person brokerages and so on. It's then, what is the cost per agent to do something? So, for example, in mortgage applications, it's now, I think they said the average is 20 hours per mortgage application because of all the documentation, all the reporting and that kind of stuff. So if you can do anything to help reduce that, that just increases their capacity. So we're beginning to work on natural language generation, so where the mortgage brokers can put in the bullet points of the interviews with the applicants and turn that into the stories that the banks want to receive. So how do you go from a small amount minimum to the narrative that the banks need? They don't really need anything bullet points, but they want the narrative. So those kinds of time savings is meaningful when you start kind of rolling that out across multiple brokerages. So there's little time saving that's going to accumulate into significant time saving. And again, the technology is then applicable across different use cases.
Cool. I saw some chat come up online. Were there any questions that came in with that chat?
No, it's us keep telling you.
Ask questions.
I've got a question.
Yeah.
And this, I guess, relates to, that dynamic between trust in a machine versus a human. And obviously, insurance is a very, very old profession.
Yeah.
So how, and it's probably a question for all of you, how do you go about convincing a business to put their trust into an AI prediction model, for example? So, as a use case in our world, we've got the technology to a space where we can actually auto accept a claim based on AI. This is a scheme to push the button because they're going, I don't understand it, therefore I don't trust it.
Yeah.
How do you take it on that?
Yeah, I mean, so from a deployment kind of journey perspective, we always look at the duality of predicting using the AI, but still the humans making those decisions. And then just continuously looking at that to go, look, there is a clear correlation between what the AI would have done and what the human would have done. And it's just building up that trust to say the outcome is the same. The outcome's going to be the same. And it's then a case of flipping the switch to go from, you can't have that uncertainty because right, otherwise the button is not going to be pushed. The other thing also that needs to be considered is how do you then monitor it afterwards? Because it's not like a bit of legacy tech. It's supposed to learn, that's the benefit, right? So, but there's also the potential that the AI begins to waver because the data coming in is slightly wrong or has changed over time, the seasonality and the data that comes through, whatever it may be. So having those monitoring systems, those safety nets, those, okay, let's just switch it back to a human. All of those things need to be considered as part of that building of trust. Because if it's a binary scenario, then it's just going to be, this has worked for the last 200 years. We're going to stick with that, thank you very much. But I think having the ability to switch between the two and also have it in parallel is really important.
I think what we found with that, because that's a good suggestion, but I think what we found was the senior people had full confidence that actually the AI was going to deliver possibly a better outcome because it had had the analysis and understood that the accuracy was probably higher than the human accuracy. And it was the people on the ground, the actual claims assessors, were the challenge. So that's exactly what we were proposing on doing, that we would have a mirroring system for a period of time until such stages there was full confidence among them.
Is that how you're operating the deployment? You're going kind of minimum viable product?
Yes.
A/B testing?
Yes. And then,
To
yes.
prove the use case?
Yes, and particularly in large sums of money like in life insurance. So the business wouldn't have been willing. Well, the business actually was trusted the machines, essentially the senior people. It was the claims assessors on the ground just didn't believe that a machine could do it.
Yes.
Yeah.
Any other questions? We're getting close on time.
How much of the work which is done on the AI in the insurance industry is for the end customer? But most of the acquisition is indirect. Most of the cost savings and other things are because of the internal system. But when we talk of customer experience, where does customer get the delight for the insurance company? Generally, it's claims that had to go through. When you go for insurance, you go through a list of agents and brokers and other things. So where do you see the sweet spot? Is it just the cost saving? Or?
I disagree completely around this just being about cost saving, to be honest. I think for an insurance company, the point of truth is at claim time. And if the customer can be assured that they're probably going to get a more accurate calculation of their claim, they're going to get it done more quickly. They're likely to have it accepted. That is all about customer experience. It's not about less staff members, etc. There are other things that will obviously come around the front end of the product relationship, let's say, versus the back end. But I fundamentally disagree that this is not about customer experience because customers want accuracy, they want speed, and they want to know their insurance company is going to pay.
And I think what we're also beginning to see is proactivity. So we're working on a couple of projects now involving IoT devices to give data to prevent claims, right? Makes insurance companies happy, makes end customer happy, right? So how do you get into that preventative space? I know AI Vitality, getting into preventative healthcare and giving incentives for doing things like wearing smartwatches and sharing all your data. But again, it's getting to that preventative space where that is then a very valuable and symbiotic, use of AI. And then even going beyond that is how do you start creating data products that you as an insurance company may have developed that can then be offered into the ecosystem, whether it be for channel, whether it be direct, whether it be whatever, just a revenue stream international. So there are other ways to think about it, to your point, beyond automation and that kind of more RPA kind of view of it, into how do we actually make this into a revenue stream? That's really the horizon kind of 2, 3 onwards where I think the technology can go.
Do you have a question, sir?
Yeah, just one about the volume and the variety of information and data that you actually need to see some sort of tangible result, whether it's in a narrow use case or a wide use case.
Yeah, I think that technology has got to the point now where there are what's called massively pre-trained models. Right? So you may have heard of GPT-3 as one of the examples, but all of the big tech companies have their own models now, which have been trained on all of human content pretty much. And it is to the point of where what even I would have thought 12 months ago was magic is now real. So now you can get to the point where you can get value out of a single document. You don't need to have tens of thousands or hundreds of thousands of cases. You can start pretty much and get value from document one, right? So you haven't got to be creating the AI to be able to get benefit from AI now. That's the generational kind of move that's happened in the last couple of years.
The accessibility, those models that are already there. I mean, I think we used 6 policy schedules to prove it, to do a little POC. And the outcome is entirely amazing. But it's not a massive amount of data at all.
I think if you want to get into building your own IP, one, what would that IP be? And is it really going to be that game changing rather than just feeling like you have to have it? But if you are going to move into the data products realm and really get to that differentiated UX, then there's the justification for having that data training your own AI. But that feels like it's down the track. There's a lot of low-hanging fruit, which is a lot more accessible without a lot of data.
Any other questions on the floor? We're at time now, so I'd like to thank the panel for your input and insight today. Much appreciated. Thank you very much. And thank you all for attending.